Most people think they know Cheech and Chong, two laid-back guys, red eyes, slow speech, endless weed jokes, a haze of laughter that defined an entire era of comedy. But what if everything you thought you knew was only part of the story? What if behind the smoke, behind the punchlines, behind the iconic films that made millions laugh, there was a story filled with tension, unexpected genius, creative rivalry, and moments that nearly destroyed everything they built together? Because the truth is, Cheech and Chong didn't start out as best friends. They didn't grow up together. They didn't even like each other at first. And yet, somehow, against all odds, they became one of the most influential comedy duos in entertainment history. This is the real story, the strange, complicated, and often unbelievable journey of two completely different men who collided by accident and changed comedy forever. And trust me, some of the most shocking moments happen when everything seemed perfect on the surface. How it all began, a chance meeting that changed everything. Their story doesn't begin on a stage. It doesn't begin in Hollywood. It begins in uncertainty, in fear, in escape. Richard Cheech Marin wasn't chasing comedy. He wasn't dreaming of fame or applause. He was a young man trying to figure out his life, studying pottery at California State University Northridge. His hands were shaping clay, not punchlines. But the late 1960s were a dangerous time to be young in America. The Vietnam War draft loomed over every decision. Young men were being sent across the world into a war many didn't believe in. And Cheech made a decision that would change his life forever. He left. He fled to Canada. Not because he wanted adventure. Not because he had a plan. But because he didn't want to die in a war that wasn't his. He arrived in Vancouver with nothing but uncertainty. No career. No roadmap. No idea what would come next. He worked wherever he could. Driving trucks, hauling carpets, trying to survive, trying to find stability in a foreign place. Comedy wasn't even on his radar. Meanwhile, Tommy Chong was living a completely different life. Tommy had already tasted success. Born in Edmonton, Canada, to a Chinese father and Scottish-Irish mother, he had grown up navigating two worlds. Music became his escape, and eventually his ticket into the spotlight. He played guitar in a band called Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers, and they weren't just another garage band. They were signed by Motown. For a moment, Tommy had everything he could have wanted. Fame was within reach. The music industry had opened its doors. But life rarely moves in straight lines. Tommy drifted away from music and found himself running something far less glamorous, but far more unusual. A topless bar in Vancouver called the Shanghai Junk. This wasn't just any bar. Tommy turned it into something experimental. Between the dancers, he introduced comedy skits, improvised performances, strange, unpredictable acts that blended humor and chaos. He created a comedy group called City Works. He didn't know it yet, but he was creating the space where history would be born. The night fate stepped in. One night, Cheech walked into the Shanghai Junk looking for work. He wasn't looking to perform. He wasn't trying to be funny. He just needed a job. Tommy noticed him immediately. There was something about Cheech. His presence. His timing. His energy. Tommy invited him to join the improv group, and everything changed. At first, nothing seemed extraordinary. They were just two men performing small comedy bits in a strange nightclub. But then, one night, something happened. During a performance, they began improvising a scene. One character was looking for his friend Dave. Dave's not here. The delivery was slow, confused, ridiculous. The audience exploded with laughter. It wasn't planned. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't rehearsed. It was pure accident. But in that moment, something clicked. They realized something powerful. Individually, they were funny. But together, they were unstoppable. They began refining their dynamic. Tommy became the calm, spaced-out hippie. Cheech became the fast-talking, sharp-edged counterpart. They were opposites, and that contrast made everything work. Audiences couldn't get enough. They left the club and began touring, performing in clubs across North America, building a following. growing into something bigger than either of them had imagined. Soon, they weren't just comedians. They were symbols of a generation. Fame came fast, but it came with a cost. Success arrived quickly. Albums sold in massive numbers. Their routines spread like wildfire. Their first film, Up in Smoke, became a cultural phenomenon. They weren't just making people laugh. They were capturing a moment in time. They represented rebellion, freedom, counterculture. But behind the scenes, things weren't as peaceful as they appeared. Because success brings pressure, and pressure exposes cracks. Cheech and Chong weren't best friends. They were partners, and there's a difference. Cheech later described their relationship in simple terms. We're brothers, not best friends. They argued constantly. Creative differences turned into personal tension. Egos grew. Tommy began directing their films, taking control of the creative process. Cheech began to feel pushed aside, his ideas dismissed, his contributions minimized. The partnership that had once felt balanced now felt uneven. What made them great also began to tear them apart. Their chemistry came from friction, but friction can only be controlled for so long before it becomes fire. The breaking point. By the early 1980s, the tension had reached dangerous levels. Tommy had taken creative control of multiple projects. Cheech felt trapped, invisible, like he had become the sidekick in something he helped create. The breaking point came with a project Cheech cared deeply about. Born in East LA, he wanted Tommy involved. Tommy refused. It wasn't just a disagreement. It was the end. After 17 years, the partnership collapsed. They walked away from each other. Fans were shocked. The duo that defined comedy had fractured. And for years, it seemed permanent. Tommy later admitted the truth. He had become controlling. Power had changed him. And by the time he realized it, the damage was already done. Life after the breakup, reinvention, and survival. Both men moved on. Cheech found success as an actor and voice performer. His voice became part of beloved animated films. He built a respected career outside the duo. Tommy faced his own battles. He became an activist. He faced legal trouble connected to his business selling glass pipes. But through it all, he remained resilient. Both men proved something important. They weren't dependent on each other for success. But something was missing. Because some partnerships leave permanent marks. No matter how far you go, the history remains. The strange stories that prove nothing about them was normal. Even at the height of their fame, bizarre things kept happening around them. At one point, filmmakers considered putting them in a Friday the 13th movie. Imagine that. Two stoner comedians facing one of horror's most terrifying killers. It almost happened. Another time, one of their most iconic visual jokes came from real life. A license plate reading MUF DVR. Fans assumed it was created for the movie. It wasn't. It belonged to an actual police officer. Reality was stranger than fiction. And perhaps the most unbelievable moment involved one of Hollywood's biggest legends. Jack Nicholson attended a screening of Up in Smoke shortly after suffering a dislocated shoulder. Doctors told him not to laugh. But he couldn't help himself. Every joke forced laughter out of him, even through pain. That's how powerful their comedy was. It could break through anything, even physical pain. The secret behind their creative genius. One of their films, Nice Dreams, had a script only 3.5 pages long. 3.5 pages. That's it. Most films require hundreds of pages. But they didn't need that. Because their magic wasn't on paper. It was in their chemistry, their instinct, their understanding of each other's timing. They made chaos feel effortless. But behind the scenes, every movement was carefully crafted, every moment planned. They made it look easy. That was the illusion. The truth most people never realize. Cheech and Chong weren't just comedians. They were pioneers. They opened doors for a style of comedy that didn't exist before them. They challenged norms. They embraced absurdity. They turned counterculture into mainstream entertainment. But their greatest achievement wasn't fame. It wasn't money. It wasn't movies. It was transformation. They started as strangers. They became legends. They broke apart. They rebuilt themselves. And in doing so, they proved something powerful. Sometimes the greatest partnerships aren't perfect. Sometimes they're messy, complicated, fragile, but still unforgettable. Because greatness isn't about perfection. It's about impact. And their impact is still felt today, long after the smoke cleared, long after the laughter faded. Their story remains strange, complicated, human, and completely unforgettable.